Over 2 years ago, I left a very abusive marriage. And one of the things that I learned during the healing process is that I repress emotions. It's a thing that I learned to do as a coping mechanism. So I wanted to give this disclaimer before starting that at times I may seem disconnected from the story I'm telling. At times I may do a little, I don't think anything is funny. That was a coping mechanism. And at times I may tell the story in a way that seems very matter of a factly type of way. The story is very real. The things that I am telling are very real. The things that happened were very real. But trauma has a way of molding you into something different. We were never created to live in trauma for an extensive amount of time. And because I did so for over 15 years, I learned different ways to adapt. I now see where I was groomed throughout my entire high school experience, groomed by Mr. Francis as well as other adults. He was 23 at the time. He was the assistant teacher, and I was 14 years old when we met. He was crying on the steps, and I'm like, what's wrong? He began to tell me that this person said if he didn't pay for his therapy, that he would call the cops. And there were so many people coming forward with their stories, and if they weren't sending them to me, they were sending them to people I know, and I was receiving screenshots like, oh, he did this to me too. I noticed that the lies began to become more and more extreme. He started preaching a lot of messages on honor and basically like blind loyalty. I felt like I was living in a movie that just wasn't even like, it just wasn't stopping. He said, because you opened your big mouth and tried to check me, you and your children will suffer like the rest of your family. That is the last thing he said to me concerning my children. I received a death threat from him when things started to come out concerning his sexuality. I can now speak out so nobody else has to go through what I went through. I didn't mean to cry. My name is Lady Renee, and this is my story. It was March 3rd, 2019. My husband at the time and I were pastoring a church. He was the guest speaker for a church in Alabama. We were all sitting down with the congregants after service, eating dinner, and the drummer at the time said, "Apostle, so how do you feel about everything that's going on with the allegations concerning R. Kelly?" I will never forget the response. He looked up from eating his food and said, "Well, I think R. Kelly likes what he likes," with a smirk. The table erupted in laughter. And I remember in that moment feeling like everything just stood still. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't dealing with a person who in the past had fallen into different sins and, you know, was remorseful for the things that he had done. I was dealing with a real life predator. So I kind of started at a piece of the beginning of the end for me. But I'll go to the beginning of the story. I was 13 years old, 9th grade freshman, attending School of the Arts in Rochester, New York. I was extremely excited to go to this school. All I wanted to do in life was sing at that time. And I remember seeing the movie Fame, and I just knew that School of the Arts would be like my chance to live out fame. So I walked into this audition. It was September 2003, and I met the teachers for this show choir called Soda Singers, one of which became my husband. So he was 23 at the time. He was the assistant teacher, and I was 14 years old when we met. In retrospect, at 32 years old, I now see where I was groomed throughout my entire high school experience, groomed by Mr. Francis, as well as other adults who were close to him, were around him at the time. And also, we went to this prophetic service. I remember it was an elder. He came and we went to this prophetic service where there was the group Highly Favored and myself. We all went. And this elder asked, did I know the man in the back? And so he was pointing at Mr. Francis. And so I did say, I said, yes, I know him. And so he said, oh, well, all I have to say is somebody want to put a ring on your finger. And I remember, you know, everybody in the church was like, oh, wow, amen, amen. And so naive, young, a child, I took that as a sign from God that this is what God wanted, because a man of God who was from out of town was saying that this is what, you know, God said a man want to put a ring on your finger. I even went to premarital counseling with Mr. Francis. I was 17 years old. He was 9 years older again. He was 26. And we went through counseling, premarital counseling. You know, now as an adult, I would never counsel two people those age gaps. And so again, it shows how it wasn't just him acting alone. There was a community who was supporting this. And so May 7th, 2007, I turned 18. It was a Monday. And I remember him asking me to marry him on that Friday. I said no. I said no because my family at the time didn't agree. And honestly, you know, I was 18. There were still some other things I wanted to do. I remember telling him, I want to see the world. And of course, he said, we'll see it together. And so he took me to his mom's job. His mom was working at the time at number 6 school. We went up there. And I don't know what he said to her, but she came back in her classroom and asked, like, hey, can we talk? And so in us talking, well, really, she did the talking. She just explained to me that God really wanted us together, and that your family doesn't always agree with the things of God, and you just have to step out and move by faith, knowing that it's God, and, you know, you'll be blessed for your obedience. And then she started saying, you know, you said you love him, so if you love him and y'all gonna get married, y'all just get married. Your family is your family. Now you two will be family. I also forgot to mention that even in this high school time, his mom is actually the one, well, she was one of the ones. She called me on my 16th birthday. I was turning 16 years old. And at that time, I was no longer allowed to be in the group and different things because things started coming out that we were together. I found out later he was actually spreading that we were together to cover up the fact that he had been molesting fellow students who were males who, and these investigations were about to come out. So, and I'll get into that later. So his mom called my house. His mom called my house and told my mom that her name was Sanicia to get me on the line. And when I got on the line, she said, happy birthday, birthday angel. Somebody wants to say happy birthday to you. So saying that to say, again, there was so much involved in this grooming. So back to May 7, 2007, on my birthday, you know, she's telling me, hey, if you love him, you'll do this. And so that Friday, May 11th, I found myself walking down the aisle to marry my husband. And I remember him telling me right off the bat, like, don't tell anybody. Like, we're going to keep our business our business. So one of the things that as an adult is an extreme red flag, besides the age difference and the fact that he was my teacher. And not only was he my assistant teacher for Soda Singers, he was also head of Highly Favored. He was also the coach for the step team that I was on. So like in so many ways, he was an authority figure, so to speak. So that is an extreme red flag, something that should have never happened. And then also, he asked me for my refund check from school. I was now at this time attending Monroe Community College. I had just received that spring refund check. And so we used that $3,000 check. It was actually $2,800 something check. We used it for him to pay for the wedding and also for us to get our first apartment on First Street. Back to just how much I thought this person was a person of integrity, which again, now at 32, I know that there's never any integrity involved in a teacher with a student or in a man that is 9 years older than a child. I know that that couldn't be integrous. However, he at the time just portrayed that he had so much character and that, you know, he was just such this man of valor. One of the things that he told me in counseling and even before counseling was that he was a virgin. He made it loud and clear, not just to me, but to others, that he was a virgin and he was saving himself for marriage. For years to come, he would also state how he saved himself for marriage and his wife saved herself for marriage, and that's why it was so great. But so he told me he was a virgin. He did mention that a few female students while he was a student, so they were all in high school at the same time, performed oral sex on him in the basement of School of the Arts, but he only did it because of his friends. And of course, he said first and last names of all parties involved. I thought I was marrying somebody who, again, was a virgin. I remember going to the doctor early in our marriage because I was having a problem. I went to the gynecologist and I just remember him being extremely nervous. And so it was a little strange. He ended up telling me that he was nervous because, you know, things can show up later. And so although it had been 7 years, he had not been with a woman 7 years prior to me, because again, he was saving himself for marriage and all women just wanted to rip his clothes off. And so he told me how sometimes things, STDs and different things, could wait and show up 10 years later. I was a virgin. I was like a real virgin where I didn't do anything with anybody, nothing oral, nothing at all, like virgin. And so he was afraid that something would appear and that it would be from him. That was one of my first clues that something probably wasn't right with what he told me. However, I dismissed it as my husband is just concerned with my health and well-being. On January 31st, 2009, my husband at the time was installed as pastor of his grandmother's church of 42 years. I was 19 years old, so literally the youngest first lady in the city, and probably like, we had started honestly researching. I was probably like one of the youngest first ladies ever. And first lady is just a term that is used when you're a pastor's wife in a lot of African American churches. And so with that responsibility, I really wanted to make sure that God was pleased, that God was proud, and that I was doing his name justice in walking this out in a way that pleased him, and showing people that just because I was a youth, it didn't mean that God couldn't use me and that he couldn't use me mightily. I just knew I was married to a man who wanted the same, who really wanted to please God, and I believed at the time that was why we were pastoring, to please, to serve, to honor God, to serve his people the way he would have us to do it. Also at that time, I was told that I officially had endometriosis, that I also had PCOS, and that it would be difficult for me to conceive even in that time, and had I waited until later, I could possibly never have children. I didn't have the biggest problem with never having children. However, my husband really wanted children. I was kind of at that time willing to risk waiting some more years, because again, this time I'm 19, we have a new church, and you know, it's just a lot of things going on with that. I wrote a book about that. But to please my husband, and realizing that I was married and that it wasn't just what I wanted, I went through 3 years of fertility treatments. I I went through going back. It was actually 2 years. It's 2 years of fertility treatments. And I had, in that time, 6 miscarriages. But he really, really wanted a child, and I really wanted to give him what he wanted. In March of 2011, right when I was around 4 or 5 months pregnant with my daughter, we left that church, his grandmother's church, and we began the Life Giving Word Center that April of 2011. In August 2011, I had my daughter, which was just a miracle within itself. 8 pounds, 3 ounces. Was just so happy, so excited, and just very, very thankful. Very, very, very thankful to God after all we had went through, that she came here and she was healthy, she was well. And so a few months after that, it was around December, my husband comes to me and he tells me that God is calling him to open a church in Atlanta, Georgia. And so, you know, he said we would have 1 church in 2 locations. On January 28th, 2013, we officially moved to Atlanta, Georgia, with my toddler at the time, to start another church. And I will never forget how much we met with the saints at our current church, saying that, you know, it would be 1 church in 2 locations. We committed to going back and forth every week, literally, to the saints. They even, honestly, the saints from Rochester, Life Giving Word Center, they gave us $2,000. They raised $2,000 to get us buddy passes so that we could travel back and forth. However, the buddy passes no longer worked because the AirTran merged with Southwest, so the buddy pass we had did not work. But to keep our word, I made sure that I booked megabus tickets. And literally, with my toddler, for several months, we were on that bus for 19 hours because it stopped in Buffalo. It stopped in Ohio for a few hours. So we were on that bus for 19 hours. And there were times where it would just be myself and my child. But I felt like I really wanted to keep my word to the people. Like, for me, it was bigger than me and me being comfortable. I really felt like, wait, but we promised these people we would be back. We have their money. Like, we got to come back. And so I was that committed. Just saying that to say that's how committed and how dedicated I was to the vision, to what I believed was a God vision. Down to even one time, things got tight. Things got tight because when the saints started seeing in Rochester how we weren't coming back as much, and attention started being placed more on Atlanta, people started leaving. And then our members in Atlanta, they left. And so we ended up having no church in Atlanta, but a small conglomerate of people. I think we probably had maybe 20 people left in Rochester, New York. And so in that time, that was around June of 2013, literally. June of 2013. And at that time, he decided that he would place more attention back on the Rochester church. And I also noticed that this relationship with one of his godsons started getting even more uncomfortable for me. This particular godson, he came to our church at around 15 years old. He was a musician, and, you know, at first when I would mention it, my husband would tell me that I was just being like, oh, well, you know, you don't really do people as much as I do people. And I'm a musical pastor, and he plays the organ, so I need to be hands-on with him. Then he went into different things as far as his relationship with his mother and his stepfather wasn't good. He went into different things as far as this person didn't know their father. And so all of these things he was basically using against me to say, shame on you for not allowing me to mentor him properly because you're feeling jealous. And so I put it way in the back of my head. I said, okay, you know, because God knows I don't want to be jealous of anybody, and especially not a young man who needs help, a young man who's really seeking a father. And so fast forward to August of 2013. We are now faced with the dilemma of being evicted from our home. First time being evicted from our home. And so he went to preach a revival in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And when he came back with enough money to possibly save the home for like a month or two. However, he knew in that time, like he had no way of us basically like sustaining it. And so he decided that we would put all our stuff in a car that we could, and we would go back to Rochester, New York. I want to mention this, and this is, some people would probably think this is small, but it was big to me. While he was going to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when I say we were about to be evicted from our home, also, like, we did not have running water. The water was shut off. Like, so it was myself, my daughter, who was about to turn 2. I'm literally pouring water we're in a mansion though, the mansion he put all on Facebook when we moved. And I'm pouring water in this mansion so we can use the bathroom and it can go down, like while he's gone. Also, I remember, I'll never forget, looking for change in the seats of the couches. I was looking for change and all I wanted to do was get noodles. And they were 79 cents at Aldi's that was down the street. So I remember getting it was like 90 cents that I found. I was so thankful, like, oh my God, thank you, God. As I'm driving with my daughter in the back, I realized that there was no gas in the car. And so I'm on 138 in Stockbridge, Georgia. And I'm driving like, oh my God, please let us make it. Like, please let us make it there and make it back. I'm just getting noodles. And I was just getting noodles because for 2 days straight, my child and I literally ate a cake mix. I had what is that thing? Not a griddle. It was a skillet that you place on the stove, and we had cake mix left. And so I was making her pancakes, like, oh, here, baby, we got pancakes, trying to, you know, keep it happy. So I made it there. I got the noodles, and, you know, we made it back home. When he got off the plane, I remember him it was her birthday. It was August 12th, 2013. And I remember him saying, like, wow, you guys look so nice. Because I was that wife that I felt like he was struggling. He was already having a hard time. Like, what was I gonna do? Make it, you know, oh, you having a hard time. And again, I'm thinking, this is a man of God. And honestly, one of the things that he would say all the time is that this is building our testimony. So honestly, you know, I would hear people's testimonies, such as Bishop Jakes' testimony, when, you know, they would go through certain things before, and then they get to this better place. And so I thought that's what it was. I thought that through this, God was building character. That's why I didn't phone a friend or phone a relative who would have gotten me out of there, because I'm like, no, this, you know, and I was told by him, this is God building us. And then also, I'm just like, okay, so I was quoting the scriptures, endure hardness as a good soldier. I was keeping a smile, not to keep an appearance, but because I thought I was going through, and I was going through gracefully, and soon this would be a testimony. But what I didn't know, that there is a thing to suffer for righteousness' sake, but I didn't know that a lot of the suffering that was happening was because it wasn't suffering for righteousness' sake. It was my husband reaping things that he had sown. And because I was connected, I was a part of receiving that harvest as well. August 12th, when he came back from preaching at this revival, August 12th, 2011, my daughter and I, we were dressed up, and you know, it was her birthday. I wanted it to be a special day. So we went to eat, and while we were eating, he discussed that it would be best for us to go back to Rochester, New York, just for a short time while he could just get things together really quick and we relocate back to Georgia. And so I agreed. We packed what we could in the car, knowing that any day the sheriff would be there to get everything out. And so, you know, when I said goodbye to the house, honestly, I said goodbye to everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. All we could fit was what we had in the car. So all of the things from like when my daughter was born, just everything you can imagine, it was all gone. we're back pastoring this church in Rochester, and it's not really going well. People are extremely disappointed, which they had every right to be. And it just appeared to be like something that it wasn't. We ended up staying in a woman who he calls his sister. She's still my sister to this day. We were staying in her one-bedroom apartment that she graciously gave us. And he kept telling me how much he did not want people in our business because, you know, people wouldn't understand what we were going through, and we just needed to keep it our business. And so I would go see my family, see my friends, and I would say absolutely nothing. I was an extremely loyal person. I still believe that confidentiality is important. And again, because I saw how he moved, at this point, I did see how he moved as it pertained to like his friends. I saw that he didn't really hold information, so I did not want him to have any information of any of my friends, so I had no problem keeping things between us. And so it was January of 2014. I remember laying on the bed, and I hurried up and jumped up. And I jumped up and I said, was this godson musician here? And he said, yeah, why? And I said, well, because I just closed my eyes, and when I closed my eyes, I saw his behind sitting where my head was. And so he's like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I knew he had to sit on the bed because we only had a bed in the entire apartment. There was not a table. There was nowhere else to be. And again, this was a place that it was just supposed to be he and I, knowing that we were there. So that happened. And then it might have been 2 weeks later, I wake up from a dream where his phone is glowing in this dream. And so I wake up from this dream, and it was about maybe 3 in the morning, which that wasn't a strange time for me to wake up because at that time I was on a prayer line that was Tuesday through Thursday at 4 a.m. And so I woke up and I just saw the phone. I went in it. When I went in the phone, I saw more than I would have ever imagined seeing. And the main person on there was this godson, was this musician. What was so perplexing even while I'm reading everything that they're saying to each other, it was the fact I also then went to his emails, I then went to his DMs, I then went to his Facebook. Like, I was going through it all. And it was just so like disturbing to see how he would go from father mode, right? Where he's telling him like, you need to do right, and you need to be at school, and do you have a resume because I'm gonna give it to this person, and ... you know. And then he's going to, I love you, and I meant what I said, I would leave everything for you, which I'm just like, leave everything? What are you leaving? Because I'm not your problem. Like, it was extremely disturbing. And like, when I say disturbing, he had a Tank song, I believe it was Amazing, that he said reminded him of him, which that very same song, he told me the very same thing. So I also went in his Google search history that same day from that very same phone, and I saw where he searched how to cook for him. And that was just, again, extremely strange, because then when I looked at his text messages, he was saying, hey, I'm cooking for you at my mom's house. What would you like? You know, then I saw where he was saying, First Lady and the baby are not here. Can you come hold me? That particular message, the other individual did not respond. The most disturbing message for me was the one where my husband, who was also this person's pastor, godfather, was telling him that maybe God had this happen to show him what love was, and to show him love that was patient, love that was kind, love that saw no wrong. Like, I'm literally reading this and almost not believing that I'm reading what I'm believing, that someone would literally take the scripture, right? 1 Corinthians 13, and try to twist that for this. And so I did not confront him that night. Again, at 4 a.m., I was scheduled to be on a prayer line. And so I was on that prayer line listening to the prayer. And I believe that prayer helped. I believe that prayer on that day is why I'm still here today and not in a different place. And I'll just say that like that. That Friday, which was a day later, we had a rehearsal where I would be meeting the musician's girlfriend who was coming from out of town. And we were having this rehearsal for a new group that my husband at the time was starting. So I remember, I didn't confront him, but I remember feeling so angry, so numb. I had a hat on my head, and I just felt like, I remember when she walked in, I felt like I just wanted to blurt it out. Like, do you know that they with each other? Like, are you aware that this is what's happening? And I knew that she wasn't. And so I remember being very quiet in that particular rehearsal. Like, I said hi, and that was it. Also, I'm looking over at this person who's playing the instrument. Like, so we go home. Well, we were on our way home, and actually this was the first time I experienced physical violence in our marriage. We were on our way home leaving this rehearsal, and he was upset because he felt as though I was not my bubbly self in rehearsal. And specifically for this godson, his girlfriend, he wanted me to make a good impression on her. And so he said, you didn't make her feel welcome. Like, what is wrong with you? I remember telling him, like, oh, just take me home. My daughter was in the back seat. And so he said, no, you're going to tell me what's wrong now. I said, no, take me to my mother's house, but I'm not telling you. And so he said, oh, you're going to tell me or you're going to get out of my car. And so me, you know, I said, I'm not getting out of anything. At that time on East Main Street, again, we are in January of 2014. He pushes me out of the car with my seatbelt still on. And so I did get back in the car, and I got on him, and physically I retaliated until I heard him screaming, our child is in the back, our child is in the back. I mean, he was saying her name. I don't want to say her name on this, but he was saying, look at her, look at her. And so when I saw her, I saw my daughter and her eyes just so big, like, what's going on? Like, in the horror. And so I sat down. Immediately he began crying and like, why did you just start going crazy? You know, and I told him what I had discovered. At that time, he's flipping out crying, like, oh my God, no, it's not what you think it is. We were really just playing. This is how people play a lot. He went from that to saying, so really, I've been scared to tell you that he was coming on to me this whole time. And he began to tell me, like, you know, I didn't understand young people and how when they do receive love and attention from father figures, sometimes they'll twist that. He called it the hero syndrome. That's what he was telling me. He's like, you know, there's this hero syndrome where when you're helping people, they will often start liking and loving you. And I was trying to catch it. I'm so glad you caught this. Like, please don't leave. I still had him take me to my mother's house. He began knocking on the door, telling me he was gonna kill himself because if I left, everyone would know it was because he was gay, and he really just couldn't take it. He was gonna kill himself. His family had already turned on him. The previous people from the church in Atlanta had turned on him. Highly Favored had turned on him. Everybody in his life always turns on him, and please just don't do it because now they're really gonna get him. Like, please don't. It was not what you think it is. He then started, you know, just I guess now looking as a 32-year-old woman, things anybody would say to get out of what they were in. So things like, look at him. Why would I do this? Like, why? Look at you and look at him. Why would I do that? And I'm not gay. I don't want a man. Why would I do that? You know, and that's my son. I don't look at him like that. I will also say, too, we were so involved with his family. Like, when I say so involved, we were over his aunt's house every single Monday for maybe like at least a year and a half. until we moved from Rochester to Georgia. He would go to that church, his grandfather's church, and he would preach revivals, and we would be there all the time, and he was close with his grandmother, like, and even with the mom, like, he would talk to the mom about how he was doing in school, and she would call him if something was going wrong, like, I need you to tell him to straighten up, like, so there was this part of me that started to believe him, because I couldn't believe that anybody would be that, I don't even want to use the word crazy, but that calculated. Anybody would be able to smile and hug and tell people that they love them while betraying them on this level. Like, I just couldn't believe it. Even with, so he had a girlfriend at the time. He also had a baby mom, and like, the way he was involved with them, it just honestly did not make sense to me that he would be right there with all of these people while in a relationship with somebody that he had groomed. I found the messages, though. He had just turned 18 years old. And so with that being said, me calling the cops, if he wouldn't tell, when I say he, the victim, the godson, if he wouldn't say, yes, this is what happened, this was true, me calling the cops would have done absolutely nothing. I ended up agreeing to go to counseling with him. We found a Christian counselor, but there were stipulations. He said that he preferred that the counselor would not be African American because African Americans would judge him. He also said he wanted it to be someone that we didn't know because they would just judge him. And then he said that he did not necessarily want them to be affiliated with any church that we knew, because he did not want to be held to just some group of text messages. He didn't want to be held to that for the rest of his life. He also had mentioned that men have affairs all the time. And unfortunately, because he was privy to a lot of people's confidential information as a pastor, he went down the list and the line of different, not just members, but even peers and colleagues and all of their infidelity and indiscretions. And, you know, he just went through the line and like, you know, don't sit on a high horse, please just forgive me, like people aren't perfect like you, and I just made a mistake, and people make mistakes, like forgive me. And so we went to this counseling, and we relocated March 2014 back to Georgia with a refund check again from my school. And so we're back in Georgia, and at this time we're now doing long distance counseling. I remember that he quickly told me that the counselor betrayed him, and he was crying, and he said he could not go back to counseling because people never understand him. He said the counselor betrayed him because one day he mentioned to me that the counselor said that I was still holding on too much to what had happened. And so I didn't believe it, but I said, oh, wow, that's funny that he said that I was still holding on to what has happened. But he told me that you have real serious psychological issues and I should really consider leaving. So then it was, oh my God, see, everybody just wants us to break up. We should not do this counseling thing. See, I should not have done that. We just need God. God will counsel us, just God. And I know now that when he said just God, he meant just himself, because he is his God. So then he went through this time of depression where he was now depressed because he was losing what he calls momentum, and he felt like he was paying for something and it was just silly text messages. And so I encouraged him to permanently sit down. I did feel as though he should not continue to pastor. However, he just kept telling me how even other pastors that he was talking to, he claimed to talk to a few other bishops about the situation, which I found out later, years later, was false. But he said that they were all saying it was just an emotional affair. It wasn't that serious. And, you know, you should just get back up. It's not that serious. And so fall of 2014, he did begin to pastor again. And we rented from a pastor who was in the previous organization he came out of. Around the beginning of 2015, it might have started before then, he began to ask people to make him a bishop. There is one time where he actually went into my Facebook account and he contacted a bishop on my behalf with this very long letter that I still have in there today, describing how he was such an awesome man of God and all the things he had done and how he deserved to be elevated as a bishop in the Lord's church. And so just to show how much he really sought after titles and after positions in church. And so by August of 2015, he was being affirmed as an apostle. I did not agree for many reasons at that time, personal reasons at that time. It wasn't even just what he called an emotional affair. It was also, there were just so many things that were not in place. For one, I paid for his robe. I paid for his robe to be affirmed in. Another thing, we were being evicted from our townhouse at the time. So literally, like, we were dressed up in these wonderful outfits on that Sunday, and by that Tuesday, we were packing the rest of our stuff to leave. Actually, where we were staying at that time, it was with this company called Dream Homes of Atlanta. And so with Dream Homes of Atlanta, you could live in these mansions, but you had to leave anytime the mansion sold. So you were living in a mansion that was being, it was on the market to be sold. So you live there for a third of the rent. So a mansion that might cost, let's say, $2,000 in Atlanta, it would be $600 a month in Atlanta. And so we had to evacuate this one. So it wasn't technically an eviction. It was an evacuation from a dream home. And so just with things like that, I just felt like being a bishop or an apostle in the Lord's church, you needed to have your things in order. You know, like, when nobody's looking, when nobody can see, your ducks needed to be in a row. And I didn't feel as though things were in a row, that ducks were in a row. So he accused me of being judgmental. He accused me of being self-righteous and just not wanting him to go far like other people. There was also this thing that he would say so much, and there are people that I haven't talked to in years that can still attest to hearing him say that a part of his destiny was to, God told him when he was driving down St. Paul Street in Rochester, New York, that he would be bigger than Bishop T.D. Jakes. And so that is something that he would say, you know, through the years. He said it to Highly Favored. He said it to the first church we pastored, to the second church we pastored. He would say it time and time again. And so he was basically telling me, like, if I'm supposed to be bigger than Bishop T.D. Jakes, like, I'm already behind schedule. On the day he was affirmed as apostle in August of 2015, we were given a church in Georgia. And so although things didn't quite work out with the church, we did gain members. And I noticed that there was a major shift in the way that he was pastoring. For one, I will say that all through the years and through every single church, even starting with his grandmother's church, we always had an assistant pastor. Like, we always had a female assistant pastor, and typically she was always much older. And so much older, one thing I can say about every last one of them, they were all very trustworthy women, very honorable women full of character and integrity, and women in which he would make myself and that woman, because we had several different assistant pastors for the different churches, the face, so to speak, of the church. And so he would hide behind our integrity by saying things like, oh, Pastor such and such would not go for that. No, you know we ain't doing that. Or, you know, like, just different things. And I now realize, like, oh, we were the face, but in reality, we really did not have much to do with we didn't have anything to do with anything negative. And so we really didn't even know of, like, the dirty work, so to speak. August of 2015, he was reunited with different people. Different people came to the church. Like, there was a large amount of men now and men in which he put in position. These men, and it wasn't all of them, but a lot of them, they began to do what I would call his dirty work. They would carry out different things, and I'm not saying that they always knew exactly what they were doing, but they did things for him without questioning what they were doing. And so one of his things that he would say now from over the pulpit, I noticed that church started to become like even more of like an occult. He would stress that we were a big family. And one of the things he would say is that, you know, we need to stay in love with each other. And I hated that term. I'm like, no, we can love each other, but why do you keep saying in love? He would also say things like, we're all we got. And I never felt that way. As much as I loved and honored the people at our church, I never felt like they were all I had, you know, but he would tell them, you know, half of y'all families don't like y'all anyway. My family don't like me. Like, we're all we got. So we need to stay in love and stay together, and don't let people talk you against your man of God. And, you know, he started preaching a lot of messages on honor and basically like blind loyalty. One of his favorite phrases was, I'm like Jesus. And Jesus said, if you're my friend, you'll do as I say. That's how I am. I'm like Jesus. And so I noticed that at that time, his friends got a lot closer to him, and he started pushing me further away. It got so strange. I remember I was preaching one time, and I just began to tell the saints, you know, how Jesus died so that the veil would be torn. And when he died, the veil was destroyed. And so now we could go to God for ourselves. I remember getting home, and he was so angry. Like, why would you tell them that? And he used one of the men in particular. He's like, you can't tell people like such and such that. They'll go crazy. Like, you can't tell them to just hear God for themselves. They'll go crazy. Like, that is so irresponsible of you. And I just remember sitting there like, irresponsible? Like, what in the world? I noticed that the respect for women started going down. There were just different things that were said over the pulpit, like, you know, woman, don't be like Job and have a crazy wife, and, you know, or you don't want a woman that's like Lot's wife and turn back. And there were just all these different things where it was like he was saying one thing, but he wasn't really saying it. And so I would sit there, and then after church, confront him like, hey, so what did you mean when you said this? And of course, he always had an explanation, but what couldn't be explained was the conduct after church at the table. So at first we were going out to eat every other Sunday with like the mothers from the church and the older pastors and different things like that. And it was a good time for me. And then that changed to, okay, some of my sons are coming out. So it was now some of the men from the church. Okay. And then it became, oh, just the sons. And so it was just the sons and myself. And then at times it would be a girlfriend or two. However, the conversations would be so disturbing. I mean, I can give a literal scenario. We're in Papados on a Sunday after church, and one of the people that's with him right now, a young man, he said, hey, so if a man gave you $1 million, would you do it to him? And then and at this time, my husband responded, well, I wouldn't, because he was offered, allegedly, $40,000 by the administrator from that choir that I was in high school. And so he said, no, I was offered $40,000 to sleep with a man, and I didn't do it. And again, I'll say allegedly, because that's what he says. Other conversations, Cheesecake Factory. I had just prayed for a woman at church in the service right before we're sitting at the table. And I'm with my children at these tables, by the way. And so one of the young men said, hey, so would you hit it? Would you hit it? Would you? And they're going down the table of who would sleep with this woman, right? Because it seemed to be like she, you know, lived a life where she may have been a prostitute, but was coming out of that life. And so they were mocking her, basically saying like, would you hit it? Would you hit it? Would you hit it? Oh, I know he would. I know he would. And so when I caught what they were saying, I remember saying, wait, what? And so My husband then says, oh yeah, don't talk like that with First Lady at the table. And I said, First Lady at the table? What about you? You're their whole pastor. So he became like, he was so upset, but he knew that he couldn't flare up because he then didn't want me to respond in front of everyone. I noticed that the lies began to become more and more extreme. So at first, you know, he would say something that wasn't true over the pulpit, and after service I would question him about it, and he would say, oh, I'm so sorry, baby, thank you for telling me, like, I don't remember details as well as you, most people don't, like, I'm sorry, that was just a mistake. But then lies became very outlandish. Like, for instance, there was a pastor in a very, very popular church in Lithonia, Georgia, and that pastor passed away. He got up one service. I was actually not in the room. I was in the office feeding our child, and I heard him get up, and he told the saints of the church, wave bye-bye. And so they're all waving, and he said, let me tell you why you're waving. You're waving bye-bye because God said that this is going to be where I pastor next. Like, we're all, get ready. Like, and he started literally, like, the church went crazy. They were so happy. And he said, get ready. And then he said, y'all know that church with, and he described the place. He said, you know that church in Lithonia where that pastor had passed away? They're looking for somebody right now, and it is mine. He then went to say that he actually had a conversation with this pastor before he passed away, which I really know is not true. But this is how, like, outlandish the lies just really were. Also in that time, he told me that I could no longer counsel the saints with him. And it was simply because I was telling members of the church to go specifically to this place called Keystone Counseling in Stockbridge, Georgia, for professional counseling for matters that were beyond beyond what we could really give them counseling for. And I thought it was our spiritual duty to send them to professionals to get more help. And so, I mean, even down to things like, there was an individual, it was a married couple, who the man was cheating with another man, and he really did not allow me to say anything to her, because he told me that I was still so bitter and I would tell her to leave, and God wanted her to stay. And that kind of control, like, it was really real. That, and especially when the spouses were homosexual, you know, undercover homosexual, he would always say, like, don't say anything to them, God is saying to stay. But it would be weird when he would counsel other people to leave their spouses because they simply weren't fitting the ministry well, or he didn't feel like he had as much control over a certain wife. If he didn't feel like he had as much control over a certain wife as he did that husband, he would start encouraging through prophecy for that husband to leave that spouse, saying, like, God has better for you, God has more for you. Don't let the enemy or tradition hold you back. And I just remember sitting there feeling sick to my stomach, like, what in the world? Like, these are marriage covenants we're talking about. This isn't anything to play with. And so the control was so real that I remember being at his 20th celebration. It was his 20th ministry celebration, and I had a mother pull me to the side, and she just expressed that her child, who was an adult, was in a real serious, she was in some real serious torment in her marriage, and she knew that she needed to move and be with her, but she knew that she would not leave, not because of the marriage, but she wouldn't leave because of her loyalty to us, and particularly because the senior pastor, my husband, would be disappointed if she left. And so she pleaded with me, Lady Renee, please, please release her. Like, she's not gonna leave if you don't let her go. Please let her go. She could do so much better. Like, and when I say she was in a bad marriage, I mean, It was so much abuse, so much neglect, just so much infidelity with homosexuality. And this person was an elder in the church. And my husband was very aware of what was going on. And he simply would just act like it was not happening, or he would cuss that elder out in the office and then say, okay, he's gonna do right now. Like literally, that is what would happen. And so I did. I heard the mother, I prayed about it, and I did advise this woman to leave. And I remember him just being so angry with me, like, how dare you? How dare you? And I remember saying, but she's suffering. Like, this is not what God would want for any of his children. Like, this is not right. And his reason for not wanting her to leave was, from what he told me, he said, well, she's gonna say the wrong thing when people ask why she left. And if she tells people that it's because he was gay, then everybody's just gonna think I'm gay too, literally, because of how close they were. And so he would let somebody who he called his daughter suffer because he didn't want to be seen as gay. He did a lot of talking against homosexuality from the pulpit at church. And even down to the point where we could no longer record services because he said that he didn't want to be like another pastor who was speaking against homosexuality and it went on YouTube. And that pastor was kind of shut down to a degree. And he was saying like he wants to be free to say whatever he wants to say. And if God doesn't like something, he wants to speak out against it. But he did not want us to record. However, at the time, anytime I was not in service, I had somebody recording for me because there was always somebody that would come up to me like, oh, First Lady, so it was so funny when Apostle said this or when he said that. For instance, this is just a random example, but it's real. One time I was in that church and he expressed how we were just so in love and everything was so good because we were both virgins when we got married that I was speaking in tongues when we were together. And I never experienced that. And so I was upset that he was lying about something that wasn't happening. And I just didn't feel like he should be talking about our bedroom instead of preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ at church. Things at the church changed so much. He also started changing the type of company he kept when it came to colleagues, like different preachers. June of 2018, actually it was July of 2018, for a month, he had this couple come in and preach. And so in their preaching, that the male, he mentioned how his wife was his spiritual daughter. And so I remember later my husband telling me like, oh yeah, you know, you're supposed to be my spiritual daughter too. You think we were arguing about something and he was basically saying, you know, I think I'm just so high and mighty and we're not on the same spiritual level. I'm supposed to be his spiritual daughter. I immediately told him that sounds like incest. And he was right. We were never on the same spiritual level, but it wasn't necessarily because he was on a higher one than me. And so they also, I remember one service where they had the saints come up and bow to the pastor. And so when I saw that that is what was about to take place, I got my kids and said, oh, we're about to go eat. And I literally took my baby at the time as well as my daughter, and we went out because I just would never bow to any man, even if he was living a holy life, even if he was the man of God that he was portraying to be and posting to be on Facebook. I just couldn't imagine bowing my knee to anybody that wasn't the God of all creation. When I started seeing all of these things that were happening with the church, and I just started noticing that there was this huge deal on sonship and him being a father to sons, and they were becoming closer. I mean, and when I say closer, like he would leave the house at 8 a.m. and would not return until whatever time he wanted to, saying he was going and that he was working full-time in ministry, and so that required him to be gone. But he was literally with the same men every day from sun up to sundown, sometimes way after. And his thing was, well, if I was working a real job, I'd be going every day, 5 days a week from 9 to 5. Like, I'm doing ministry. And so I remember several times, like, they would be at the mall, they would be at lunch. And there were even times where I would go up to the church. One time in particular, I went up to the church because Bible study was about to start. And so I'm going up to the church with my daughter, and he is in the office playing a video game, a Sega Genesis that I purchased for him the Christmas prior, eating Wingstop with some of the guys. Like, they're having a good old time. And so I asked him, like, so this is full-time ministry? Meanwhile, if there was somebody in the hospital, unless it was one of his favorites, it was me or the congregational care pastor going to see them, because he just had so much to do. He was just so busy. If somebody needed something serious, unless it was a group in his favorites, he didn't attend to it, you know? And so because I was doing so much work behind the scenes, I couldn't imagine sitting playing video games while my wife and child is at home, you know, like, it was just too much to do to be playing games. And so he said, well, that's the way that I get to know the saints. Like, that's the way that I get to know my sons, and that's how I'm building a camaraderie, and that's how I get them to trust me, even down to eating. He would say, like, I get them to trust me by eating. When we eat, I get to know who they really are. When people eat, they open up. He would say that a lot. And so things started going from bad to worse. So I remember sitting him down. It had to be November of 2016. And I just began to say, like, you know, I really feel like you are living an undercover homosexual life. And I want you to live however you choose to live, you know? Like, seriously, all jokes aside. And so I started asking him, how could we make the split as easy for our daughter as possible. At that time, I started looking into like divorce care for kids, because I just wanted her to be good. Although he wasn't very active in her life, she still had the illusion of having a father present, because he was still there, although he wasn't present. And when I say that, how present can you be if you're spending your days monitoring the Facebook pages of your saints? Like, it would be like, okay, baby, you know, until he wanted a picture to post. And so with that said, he began telling me, like, you're selfish and you just don't want to do what's right for the ministry. And what about the saints? And they're going to suffer, and don't do this, don't leave. And so I remember him becoming irate. And for safety reasons, I said, okay. However, at that point, I did reach out to someone, and I was making a plan to leave. Literally, it wasn't even a week later, I discovered that I was pregnant. And so in me discovering that I was pregnant, I was still determined, like, okay, well, I'm still gonna leave, actually. And he just began begging me, like, no, this is God. Like, this is God. The fact that you're pregnant right now, this is God. He had wanted another child. He wanted a son, because he would be the one to carry on the name. He doesn't have any other people in his family with his last name as far as his father is concerned. And so it was very important for him to have a son. So he was just saying, no, God answered our prayers. And not only did he answer my prayer, but also I get a chance to show you and prove to you that I'm going to be a good father. I didn't do good when our first child was born. And so I'm going to do so much better. And, you know, like, this is my next chance. I promise you, I'm going to make it good. I'm going to make it good. And so I'm pregnant. I have this other child. And so I consider, like, okay, he's saying he's going to make it good. And so I go in for an ultrasound. It was the 11th week. I thought I was going to hear the baby's heartbeat. And when I went in alone, because he was handling ministry. Come to find out, he was out eating lunch with who he began to call his right-hand man. And so I went into this, I thought it was going to be, I'm hearing this baby's heartbeat in a potential ultrasound. And I will never forget, I saw a doctor that I didn't know, and, you know, she just kind of gave me just, I don't even know the look. I don't know how to describe the look. And so I'm like, oh, hi, I'm all happy, excited. And she said, so I have some news for you. And so I'm like, okay. And so she began to tell me that they did a pap smear previously, and it looked as though I had cancerous cells on my cervix. So I'm like, okay. However, they would not be able to fully tell if I had cervical cancer or not until they did a biopsy. However, this particular biopsy would potentially jeopardize the baby's life. And she was saying, especially because we were so early in pregnancy, just by them doing the procedure, I could miscarry. And so the other thing she told me was that cervical cancer, when you're pregnant, because of the hormones, it is extremely aggressive. So it was like an extreme risk to not do this procedure. However, it was an extreme risk for me to not go through with the procedure to even see if I indeed had cervical cancer. However, it was an extreme risk for the baby to go through with the procedure to see if I just had cervical cancer or not. And so for me, I had already had 6 miscarriages. I could not imagine, doing this procedure, knowing that I'm only going to find out if I have the cancer or if I don't, and risking my child's life. And so I asked, like, well, can we wait? Can we just wait longer? Like, what can we do? And she was just saying, yeah, we can wait longer, but it may become aggressive, and you both could potentially not make it. And so I'm receiving this news by myself again while my husband is at lunch. I call him. I asked him to come to where I was. And so he came. He actually came to pick me up because I Ubered to that appointment now that I'm remembering it. And so he came and picked me up, and I told him everything. And I will never forget that he looked at me and he said, okay. He said, well, right-hand man really needed a ride to go get his car. Like, is it possible that we could just go take him to get his car real quick, and then we could talk about this a little more later? And so after I just told him this news, we went to go pick him up to take him to get his car, and then we could discuss it later. And so later in discussing it, I still decided that it was best that I was just going to trust God. I had that kind of faith. And I also really asked him to keep it confidential. And when I say confidential, I really didn't tell anybody. I think I told like 2 people in different parts of the country that I didn't even have like close relationships necessarily. I just needed them to pray because I really didn't want people in it who would put me above this child, or, you know, I just really believed that I could live, and I really wanted this child to live as well. And so that pregnancy, though, they told me it was a high-risk pregnancy. They gave me like a whole bunch. I have documented things that they gave me to do, different things that I couldn't do. The doctor kept putting me on bed rest. And so I would just be glad to make it to another day. And so I remember at that time, I was in my daughter's, she had an iPad that I actually had purchased for my husband, but she was using it all the time. And I remember one day I was just like taking a break from all the research of things that you could do to kind of like kill cervical cancer, just in case I had it, you know. And so I pick up this iPad and I find this video of gay porn. And so I questioned him about it, and he began to tell me like, oh no, I didn't watch the video. What happened was the men from church, and he named their first and last names, I know them all. They were all sitting around after church and they were talking about this site that they would go look at. He said, so I was looking at stuff. I thought I would go look at the site to see stuff for us, and I didn't know they had gay stuff on there too. And so then I saw it and was like, oh my God, I've never seen that before. So I clicked it. He said, but I was so scared, I hurried up and put the iPad down and I just ran. And so I'm like, you know, I'm just, at this point, I think I had been lied to so much, and he had so many explanations all the time. I just looked at him like, okay, so how is the video complete? Because, you know, when a video is complete. And so he then began to say he was scared and really just, he couldn't finish, he couldn't even click off of it. And he's like, do you think I would keep something like that? Like, I would hide it from you. And so there were many things like that that would happen over and over while I was pregnant. Also, too, he told me that right-hand man, when we found out we were having a boy, right? I thought like he would be happy because he said this is what he always wanted. And he was happy until he began to tell his friends, and he said right-hand man said to him, oh man, now that you're having a son, you're gonna forget about your sons at church, your spiritual sons. And I remember just saying like, wait a minute, what 30-something-year-old man with kids who has sons themselves, like, where they say that at? Like, am I crazy? What's happening? And I do believe that in that moment when my ex-husband heard all of that, he really started doing everything in his power to prove that that wouldn't be true. And so every chance he got, he was away. Like, and at this time, my daughter was still at a school in Lithonia, Georgia, which it was a charter school that I found out later he was telling people he was paying for this private school that was $10,000 a year for her. It was a charter school, and because we had moved so far and I was on bed rest, he was taking her to school every day. He would take her to Lithonia where right-hand man lived, and he would literally stay there from when he dropped her off in the morning until he picked her up at 3 in the afternoon. He would be there. So all of this time they were spending together, getting to know each other, and I guess building a stronger relationship than the one we had. While I was at home praying that I would live and that this child that I was carrying would live. So that he also at that time would not come home from church until on Tuesday nights. He would leave at 8 a.m. and he would not come home until about 1 a.m. the next morning. And he would say like, no, we're really in church all this time. We're really in church all this time. And I can attest that many of the times they probably definitely were. And then we did live an hour away. But I would also say, hey, so respect not just for our family, but for the other families. You can't have people in church from 7 p.m. to midnight, you know? And every time they weren't in church, he would also go out to eat after and all that. Again, while I'm at home, laying there praying that we live. In this time, I will also say that he started to wake up. This is the beginning of when I would wake up, and in the middle of the night, he would be standing over me, or he would be looking over me like this, and I'd be like, what's wrong? And he would start crying, and he would tell me how he saw me dead. He would tell me, he would describe, I would have on this hot pink dress. He described how my hair was in this pretty high bun, described like the jury I had on, all of that stuff, described the different pastors and leaders that were there, who was crying, who wasn't. Like, he would go in great detail of how, like, I keep having this reoccurring dream of you dead, like, oh my God, like, oh my God. And so, I mean, I believe now that that was probably a fantasy of his, that he wanted to become my reality, because he and I both knew that death was uncertain at that time. I didn't know if I had the disease, and I didn't know if I was going to die from it. There was such a disregard for me in this time. We went to Fort Lauderdale to preach a revival, and he had allowed right-hand man to use our vehicle at that time. Well, it was technically my vehicle, registered, insured, everything in my name. And so somehow the car broke down. I ended up driving it while pregnant, and it broke down on me 3 times. One time, I drove myself to the hospital around 4 a.m. because I was having contractions. It was around July of 2017. I believe it was 2 weeks prior to actually having my son. And so I woke him up and I said, listen, I'm having contractions. Could we please go to the hospital? And I remember him saying, no, it's probably just Braxton Hicks or something, just stay. And I'm like, no, I really feel like this may be it. Please take me to the hospital. he refused. He said, well, I'm tired and they're just gonna have us there all night, and you know that be making me not feel good, and I got a lot to do in the morning, like just lay down. I said, I really need to go. And so I did go. There was something of concern, a reason why I needed to be there. I'm glad I went. And when I was released the next morning, the car broke down on the way home. I was also in danger, not just because the car kept breaking down. Also, he had discovered from what he told me that right-hand man had an affair with a woman who was married where we were living in Jonesboro, Georgia. And in that time when we were in the revival and he was using our car, he was taking our car to her house. And so he expressed to me that right-hand man had put our lives in danger because this husband, who was now upset with him, knew our vehicle. And so now I'm driving this vehicle that's breaking down in the same city or area where this husband is. Like, God only knows what could have happened. And so there was just this is just another example of how there was absolutely no regard. Also mentioning, while I'm on this same individual, this same husband came to the church that we were at on Covington Highway with a gun while we were all in service, and he was looking for right-hand man. And so just so many times our lives were put in danger because of the person I was married to, who was a pastor, and the people he had in leadership, or the people who were his friends. So I have my son, and the day I went into the hospital, actually I had him on July 21st. On July 20th, I went to the hospital because I was having contractions, and he was there along with my daughter. And I remember him saying, like, oh, are you sure? Because I have a meeting at 1 o'clock. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? I have a meeting with one of the sons at 1 o'clock. And I'm like, yeah, actually the meeting was at 11, and he was upset because he's like, I got this meeting and I don't want to lose the momentum, and you about to have a baby and we're going to have to slow down again, and I don't want to have to slow down and lose momentum. Like, I need to go to this meeting. Like, are you sure? And so they ended up telling me that I was like a centimeter dilated or something, and you know, I could take time to go home and walk around and all of that. And so I went home. He had this son of his meet him at our home at 1 o'clock so he could meet. They were downstairs, and I remember it being 8 p.m. and I'm listening to them downstairs watching Hell's Kitchen while eating, and I'm upstairs contracting. And I just remember being like, wait, here am I uncomfortable. And you know, if you ever have kids, it's very uncomfortable. And I remember texting him like, hey, can you like come upstairs? Like, what's going on? And so he ended up telling me like, well, this is the way that this is how I build ministry. I have relationships with people. You do things very different. I have to have relationship. And so I had my son the very next day. When I have my son, he leaves the hospital that night because he said he needed to have a good rest. He needed to sleep well, and he had to preach the next morning. And you know, it bothered me on so many different levels, one of which I will express. On October 15, 2010, I had my last miscarriage. He was actually in the hospital at this time for diabetes. And I stayed with him that entire week from the 10th until when he was released. So I knew that I was having a miscarriage. I was sitting in a chair. And when I say I stayed at the hospital, I mean like literally clothes were brought to me at the hospital. I got in the shower at the hospital. That's how much I stayed because he said he was afraid. He didn't want me to leave. He didn't know how to talk to the doctors. He didn't want to talk to them alone. And so I stayed while miscarrying our child, sitting in a recliner. I didn't have the ability to even lay it back to sleep. And so I just couldn't believe that the man that I did that with and for, I'm having his baby, and now he could really look me in the face and say, I need to go home to sleep because I have to preach in the morning. I thought it was just and I was ready to leave then. And I believe then, honestly, I had decided, like, no matter what happens, I'm leaving. So we go home once he picks me up from the hospital. We go home and he says, right-hand man would like to come see the baby. And he comes at 8 p.m. I end up, you know, he sees the baby. I end up going upstairs. And I remember it's around midnight. And so now I'm like, okay, is he gonna come upstairs? Like, this is our first night home, me and your new baby, our first night home. And so he didn't come upstairs. And so at around 1 a.m., I text him like, hey, can you bring me some watermelon? And so he brought me the watermelon, and then he went back downstairs. And so it was finally around 3:45 a.m., literally 3:45 a.m., that I finally said, hey, can you please ask him to leave, because this is our first night home and I would like to be with you. And so he left, and he began telling me like, oh, well, he was just talking about different things in ministry and different things on his heart and different changes he's making, and I'm excited for him. And I just remember in that moment telling him like, but this is not the time. This is inappropriate. This can't be life. Like, I'm all for ministry. I'm all for loving people, but this cannot be it. Like, I just had your child, your 8-pound, 10-ounce child. This can't be life. And so my son then began to grow. And unfortunately, it wasn't long before I was told that my son could no longer be at the dinner table with us after church because he was making too much noise. I mean, literally, he was like maybe 4 months old. And my husband arranged for him to go with another member after church until that following Monday. And I remember telling him like, absolutely not. And he's like, well, you're complaining about me not helping, and this is my way to help. And, you know, me saying, can you help, was more like, can you please change a diaper because you haven't changed any? Can you please hold him sometimes in the middle of the night when he's crying? Like, I didn't mean, can he go to somebody else's house overnight? And so he basically explained to me that when he eats with his sons, he wants to be able to enjoy himself. That's his time right after church to decompress. And he felt like I was being an awful wife by saying like, no, my son needs to be at the table with us. And so we argued about it. And then he's just like, well, I need him to go. Like, I need him to go. So my son for several months went with them after church and would not come home until the following day when he would pick him up when he was doing a radio show. And sometimes that would be maybe 7 p.m. if he would go before, if not even later. I noticed that he also started telling me that my son was too light. And that was perplexing because previously he had told me that my daughter was too dark. I remember him saying one day like, oh my God, I don't want her to get picked on. She is so dark. She's a lot darker than I am. I never imagined she would be this dark. I thought she would be, you know, near your complexion. And so my son is like the color of my mother. And that was a problem for him as well. He's like, why he's so light? And people think he don't look like me, but it's only because he's so light. He then started saying the little N-I-G-G-A doesn't like him. And so I'm like, at this time, he might have been 8 months. And he's like, yeah, he don't like me, but that's okay because I don't like him. But at the end of the day, this baby think he your man. And I'm like, huh? So he would make this joke when I was feeding him. He was a breastfed child. Like, oh yeah, nigga, like, that's fine. Those are mine, you on. Those are mine, you're on. And I would just tell him like, hey, stop. Like, babies pick up stuff like this, it didn't feel right. And so one time he took him, he said, you know what, I'm gonna try, I'm gonna do better. So it was March of 2019. My son had not turned 2 yet, and he took him out to lunch with a friend who was visiting. And I remember he brought him home and he said, oh, it was fine. You know, your son was kind of looking at the man strange for a little while, but then he started, you know, playing with him. He then began to tell me that his friend made the comment and said, hey, how do you feel that your son is the way you are and you're how you are? And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, he wanted to know how did I feel that my son is so masculine and I'm how I am. And so, again, I'm like, what is that? Like, my son is one. So a lot of even his humor around children, and in particular, even our children, was just extremely inappropriate, and I would become very uncomfortable. There was this time that I actually caught on camera where my son and I are playing, and I'm watching him learn his tongue because he's about 8 months. And you can actually hear in the background his father saying, I eat pussy, mommy. Hi. Hi. What's up? What are you doing? Learning a new trick with your tongue?
Yeah, get that going. Yeah, I can eat pussy, man.
Also, there was this time where my son and I, we walked into his office, and his office was a place where all of the men pretty much would gather and they would congregate right after service. And so they were all in there, and I remember I had a door fob for a Hyundai Genesis. And so it was like this, and my son put it in his mouth. Again, he was not one yet. And a few of the gentlemen said, whoa, whoa. And I looked like, what does that mean? And they were trying to insinuate, like it looked as though he was performing oral sex. And so I immediately asked my husband to come here because I thought at that point I was going to explode. Like I thought I was going to be on the news for real because I don't think that's funny. And so I remember asking my husband, like, I need you to come here right now. And I said, did you hear what they just said? He's like, they didn't mean it like that. They're just playing. Like, come on, take a joke. There's nothing funny to me about children being looked at as anything sexual. And so I remember just telling him, like, they're perverted and they need, like, this is disgusting. And, you know, what you got going on, it's nasty. This is not okay. There was another time, it was August, forwarding to August of 2019, after I had initially left, where he literally, my son had a popsicle. So he had just turned 2. He had a popsicle because he was recovering from head, nose, foot. And he had the popsicle in his mouth. And I remember him saying, son, why you holding that popsicle like that? Stop sucking that popsicle like that, son. I wasn't facing him, so I'm like, okay, maybe I didn't hear that. I remember telling the counselor, and so she said, you know what? Give him a popsicle again when he's around and see what happens. And I did the following day. And he said, oh my God, son, you're gonna have to stop sucking that popsicle like that. And I just remember being like, oh, he'll never be alone with my son. Like, something is wrong. There was also a time prior to that where my son was not yet walking, and his father was standing naked in the bathroom. I had walked in the bathroom to him standing there naked, and my son was just tall enough to be right where his penis was, where like his head was right where his penis was. And I remember saying, what is happening? Like, my son was kind of like looking up at him, and he said, oh no, he's just seeing what things are. I'm just showing him what things are. Again, and that was really like the biggest straw for me leaving, because I really realized that this was the beginning of me really realizing that he was sick beyond what I could imagine. I also think that it is not funny. Molestation is not funny, whether it's my child or anyone else's child. And unfortunately, fathers molest children. There are mothers that molest children. And I had just decided that there was no way in the world that would happen on my watch. There was no way in the world that would happen while I turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, my husband is a man of God, so I know he won't molest my child. There were a lot of things that happened prior to me leaving in 2019. There were a lot of things that happened after I left in May of 2019. One thing that I can say concerning my children is that I had offered supervised visitations because of things that I saw with my own eyes that, frankly, I felt he needed supervision. And then I received a death threat from him when things started to come out concerning his sexuality. And so for my safety and for the safety of my children, I asked that every visitation be at a supervised facility. instead of that ever happening, he went to Facebook and, you know, put up a video saying how much he loved me and just wished things were good, and, you know, crying and saying he was suicidal, and people are spreading rumors about him. He then also began to express how much he loved his children and how he just couldn't imagine being separated from them. And, you know, I, in reality, cannot imagine being separated from my children. They have not seen him in 2 years. They have not heard his voice in 2 years. My son is now 4. My daughter is now 10. And so my son doesn't even really remember who he is. And my daughter, honestly, she doesn't mention him. She did ask when the pandemic happened if he had reached out, and at that time he had not. And so I'm saying that to say, I could not imagine not knowing the sound of my children's voices at this age. I could not imagine not knowing. Before I left in 2019, he told me that my son wasn't speaking as well. And he said, I think he's a little slow. You need to get him some help. And so immediately I'm like, oh, you know, I'm calling and trying to get him appointments and stuff. But he hasn't even checked in to see, like, did he go to speech therapy? Can he talk now? Are things well? And really, come to find out, my son did not have a speech problem. It was just, for some reason, he was just very disgusted and annoyed with him. And I guess because he told me that he felt as though our children stopped us from being like rock stars, and he lived like a rock star. And so he wanted to just do what he wanted to do, and he felt like children got in the way of that. So I couldn't imagine not knowing my children right now, just to keep face on social media, just to keep with a narrative that is so far from the truth on social media. And so I will say that if I never learned that he is not well, this showed me that he's really not well. He doesn't know if they've eaten. He doesn't know. The last thing he told me about my children was that me and my children would suffer because I told the bishop about the different things that were happening behind closed doors. So he said, because you opened your big mouth and tried to check me, you and your children will suffer like the rest of your family. That is the last thing he said to me concerning my children. He started going to the hotel a lot when my son was born because he said that he needed a space to hear the voice of God. He said he was going through another season of depression, and he was just feeling like things weren't going as good for him as he thought they would be going. And so he needed to go away to the hotel to seek the face of God. At this time, we were in a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home with the full basement with just 2 very small children. So although I didn't understand it, I didn't really have the energy anymore to fight. One time, I remember coming home, it was a Sunday, I had taken the kids out to eat, and I came home and he was laying in the bed. And so he said he was sick. And so I'm like, okay, well, are you okay? And so he said, oh, I didn't want to tell you, but I was so depressed. And I went down to the bar at the hotel. I told a stranger what was going on, and that stranger slipped me marijuana, a gummy. And so he began to say how he ate it, and he then got really, really sick, and right-hand man had to come help clean him up, and he had to get a whole different room, and like he went through this whole story, and he said right-hand man helped clean him up, and he then went to preach the following morning at church, and he was still sick, and so now that's why he came home early. And so he then told me, like, he was crying. I have this actually recorded, and I will say that I have like the last 4 years of our interactions and different interactions and leadership meetings and different things he said in church over the pulpit. I have many of those things recorded because he started telling me that I was just hearing things. And so I started recording so that I would know that I wasn't just hearing things and that my memory was serving me correctly. So it got to a point where different things would be said over the pulpit that were very conflicting. One of which he was actually describing a violent situation that happened with his mom. At this time, the media ministry was not recording, but I did have permission from him to record so that he would be able to play back his messages.
She got her purse and went and got her truck. For a minute, I forgot she was my mom and treated her like a nigga. You know sometimes you forget. Anger make you forget it. That's why you should make folks angry, because they might forget it. See, all right. You think you get angry? Other people get angry too. You think you're a big bad wolf? Let me tell you something. I'm the wolf, I'm the Hulk. So she goes and walks out the door and gets in her car. Something took over me, but I don't know what it was. The enemy took over. Anger. It wasn't even enemy. It was anger. Again, when she started her truck up, I put my hand up on the back of that truck and lifted it up. I lost my mind. Told my friends was there. They said, "Oh, put it down. Oh, put it down." I was like, "Oh, God, lift the truck up." Because when you get angry, another spirit takes over. So they're not going to talk to me. That's true, sir. They're not going to talk to me. That's why I be telling all these people, all my sons, they can, every one of them got their moment when they try with me. You don't want to do that. Because this little cute preacher that you got up here, that's a learned behavior. I'm a nigga all day. Amen. Amen. All day, don't you let these pastors fool you. You get me angry. I'm going to show out. And I'm going to show out on you just the way you showing out on me. Talk about Jesus. Yes! Y'all think only niggas is on the corner. No, a lot of them in the pulpit. I'm one. Yes, sir? And some people in church need that. They take advantage of people and think everybody is a punk. Everybody ain't no punk, and they will get you right where you stand. Did you? I'm just saying, no, you ain't just saying nothing to me. Think about what you said.
Also, there were things like, we had a friend whose son was killed, and we went to the funeral, and my husband at the time didn't allow me to hug this friend after or go to the cemetery or anything like that because he was upset that her husband didn't allow him to preach. He said that this was a huge platform, and if he was really his friend, he would have let him speak. And he said, everybody wants to be his friend until it's time to give him a platform. And he said he could have done a much better job than the person that was up. And so these were things like, I just remember feeling devastated in that moment, because you have to be some type of monster to think about yourself in that moment, let alone you're thinking about a platform. And things like that really let me know he was not a person who, every now and then just fell, or every now and then fell short of the mark, but he was a person who really had a wicked heart. Things such as platform, like I really hate that word now because I would hear it so much. I would hear how people in Rochester, New York just used him for his platform. He would often tell even the people in Georgia how he was so popular in Rochester that he could literally have pick your nose service and people would come from everywhere. And so he used things like even Facebook to receive a certain amount of validation. Honestly, he used this website called Engineer Facebook likes or something like that, and he would purchase Facebook likes. He would purchase Facebook views, and this is not something that I'm saying that I don't have record of. He was using the church's PayPal, which I'm the one who still has the login information for that account. And so you can see where he was purchasing these views, he was purchasing these likes. And that wouldn't matter necessarily if he wasn't then at church saying, see, people know that your man of God is something. Look at my Facebook. You can see. You know, and image just became something that he was so very serious about. He started changing our faces literally with this app called Perfect 365. He would tell me all the time if I took a picture of us, send it to me first so I could put some love on it. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so one time I remember sitting next to him like, what are you doing in our picture? He would literally airbrush our faces. He would take away our bags. He would add white to us. And it wasn't just me. It wasn't just him. He would do it for our daughter as well. And things just started to there were just times where things started to get weird. He started talking about how he thought different men in the church kind of was starting to like him. And then he was wearing makeup. And so at first he told me, well, he's wearing it for skin complexion. And so, you know, I mean, that's your face. I'm not, like, who am I to say you can't wear it? And so then he started purchasing different things, such as, honestly, he purchased a fake behind. And so I'm like, wait, why do you need this? And he was putting it on for church. And I remember saying like, wait, why are you doing this? And he said, well, I need my behind to look a certain way in my pants. And like, I don't want to be getting up there looking all saggy in my pants. But then at the dinner table with the men, I would hear him talking about how different men were showing their prints and different things like that. So I started to notice like, oh, I think he's kind of trying to purposely entice people. And again, I have the receipt for that purchase as well. So like, these are things, everything that I'm saying, I can testify in the court of law. Like, this isn't me being facetious. This is just me showing how things just started to kind of unravel and I started to see more. May 11th, 2017, he ran in the room saying I needed to pray. And so I'm like, what's wrong? He then began to tell me that he felt like he was having a heart attack. The paramedics came, they discovered that everything, all his vitals, everything looked great. And they told him like, you know, all is well, they were leaving. He began to cry and he said to me, Renee, but I really feel like something is wrong and I don't want anything to happen to me. And so me being his wife, I told the paramedics, like, no, please take him now. Please take him now. So very long story short, we get to the hospital. They sat him in just the regular waiting room with everyone else. I left for less than 30 minutes to drop my infant son off with the person who was watching him. I came back and he had told me at that time that one of the assistants, one of the nurses told him that it looked as though there were enzymes around his heart that could indicate a heart attack. Not that he had a heart attack, but that the enzymes around his heart looked like he may have. And so they were going to do more testing to see if they could determine that he had a heart attack or not. He called everybody. He called everybody, telling them, oh my God, I just had a heart attack. I just had a heart attack. And I'm sitting there watching him like, no, like, let's wait until we get confirmation. They ended up keeping him that night. It was not for a heart attack. They determined he did not have a heart attack. Legally, I can't say why they kept him that night, but I can say that he did not have a heart attack. And so he then told the church, he kept with the story of a heart attack. He had our bishop come in town and everything. And that was the first time I actually left with my children because I just couldn't keep up with the lies. And I remember him actually admitting to me, he said to me, he said, well, you know, you're mad about me saying I had a heart attack, but I just need time to rest. He said, and furthermore, like, and he began to cry and he said, how do you think I feel that my family thinks I really had a heart attack and none of them have come to see me? None of them have called me or they don't care. Like, how do you think I feel, you know? And so I remember then feeling bad, like, wow, they thought he had a heart attack and nobody really came. Then there was November of 2018. We had decided to host Thanksgiving that November. And a lot of my family, they were flying in from Rochester, New York to Georgia. And so we were at around the 14th. we received an eviction notice. And so we needed, I believe it was like $2,000. I have the paper still from the sheriff, but I believe it was around $2,000, $3,000 that we needed in order to stay. And so he asked his mother for some money. It was $200. He asked her to borrow $200. And I think it ended up being $400. So he told me that he brought it on that Wednesday. She wanted it on that Sunday right after church because he told her, like, you know, he would get it at church that Sunday. And so that is where the cancer lie started. The cancer lie, he ended up telling me that it started because he had to give his mom a reason why he was borrowing money from her. And he didn't feel comfortable telling her that he was borrowing money because we were about to be evicted. So he told her, like, you're doing all this and you don't really want to give me the money, but at the end of the day, I had to spend my money. At this place to get help. And so he's telling me this, and I said, well, what help? And so he sat me down and he said, Renee, I didn't want to tell you this, but a month or so ago, the doctor told me that they found a spot in my stomach and that I have cancer. And so he said he had been at Progressive Medical, which was a place that I had previously used. And that is a place that you pay basically out of pocket if you don't have insurance. We had Medicaid at the time, so they didn't take it. And so I looked at him and I said, that's a lie. Like, I literally said, that's a lie. And I knew it was a lie because, again, I was the one with his insurance cards. I was the one who always made any of his appointments that he ever went to. For over 12 years. So I didn't understand how now at this point you would not only go to the doctor without even telling me, but you would get this cancer diagnosis. You would hide it from me and only tell one of the other members at the church. Until then, you borrowed money from your mother. She had an attitude about it, according to you. And so then you blurted out like, well, I only borrowed it because I had cancer and I had to pay. And so I said, that's a lie. And he's like, no, I promise. Like, why would I lie about that? And so I'm like, okay, so what did the doctors tell you to do? And so he said, they gave him this pill to take once a week, and he would take it once a week to watch the cancer disintegrate prayerfully. He never showed me where the pills were. And again, this is a person who, anytime he ever went to the doctor, the dentist, anything, I would be the one fulfilling the prescription. So again, I'm just like, this is not adding up. And even though they didn't take insurance, you would definitely need a prescription for that. So I ended up calling where he said he went. And I called like, hi, this is Mrs. Francis, just calling to make a follow-up appointment for my husband. I said his name, and she's like, I don't see him in here. And so, and I won't say her name on here, but she began to search for him, and I'm like, are you sure? And she's like, well, when did he come? And so I gave her the date he said he came. She searched the records, the calendar for 3 months prior to when he said he was there and never found him anywhere in the records. And so she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I can't find him. I knew why she couldn't find him, because he had not been there. And so she then said, well, could he have been a patient 2 years prior? Because we did get a new system 2 years prior. Long story short, she searches for him then. He's nowhere to be found. 2 weeks later, when he knew, I asked him, I said, hey, so have you been getting any blood work? Like, what are they doing to, keep up on this? 2 weeks after me asking that question, he comes home with this band on his arm, and he's like, oh, I didn't want to bother you today, so I went and got my blood work done. And I said, well, where did you go? And he couldn't name the facility. It wasn't even a week after that, in the mail, I went to check the mail, and there was something from the Red Cross that said, thank you so much, Charles, for your donation. So he had donated blood. And I'm saying that to say that is how much he would do to prove a lie. Also, I walked in the room one day to him on the phone. And when he was on the phone, I heard this beep, beep, beep. So I looked, and his laptop was up. And it was on YouTube, and it literally said hospital sounds. And so it was doing the beep noise, and it also had this hospital sound in the background, like of people paging people. And so he looked at me and said, and so he finished his conversation and said, oh, okay, well, First Lady walked in, so I'm gonna have to call you back, okay? Hung up the phone. And so I said, what are you doing? He looked at me and he started crying and he said, Renee, you don't understand. When you tell people you're sick and you need a break, you get a break. When I tell people I'm sick, they don't believe me unless I'm laid up somewhere in the hospital. And again, this was another thing. Like, I felt like I was living in a movie that just wasn't even, like, it just wasn't stopping. And these were things that were happening that I had to record. I had to document, because, like, who in the world would believe that people did things like this in real life? And so with the cancer thing, he had started spreading to other people. Like, I have cancer, but don't tell my wife. I have cancer, but don't tell my wife. And I found out later, after I left, people were telling me, like, I'm so sorry. He told me he had cancer, but not to tell you because he didn't want you to worry. Specifically, too, there was a woman from our city who got pregnant. Well, there was cancer in her body, and she went back for the ultrasound, and God had placed a baby in her womb. And this is a person that I love, and it was like everywhere on social media. And I remember him telling me, like, oh my gosh, she just blew up over this. Like, she blew up over this, and how we even know that's true? And I said, no, I'm sure it's true. Like, we'll see the baby, we'll know it's true. Like, I'm sure it's true. And I'm rejoicing, like, thank you, God. And he began to tell me, see, you never tell people what you're going through. You never tell people about your sickness and stuff, and you're stopping your blessing. Like, he started going through the list of the different shows she was on based on her releasing this testimony. And so I do believe that in addition to his mother, him wanting to give his mother a story as to why he needed the money, he also saw this as an opportunity to come up. He saw this as an opportunity, like, hey, if I got cancer and then I'm well, I could potentially get publicity. There were so many things that I found out once I left, one of which someone contacted me telling me that they were going to come out with some information, and they wanted me to know that it involved the person that I was married to. When I was pregnant with my son, I would walk into the room and I would often hear my husband on the phone talking to another man. And in these conversations, he would describe different things that had happened previously. However, he would always describe it the same. He would say that this person, he would sleep, and this person would perform oral sex on him. And he didn't mention just one person. He mentioned several different people. And the major problem with the people that he mentioned, they were all people who were my age and fellow students of, students. They were in school when I was in school, which meant he was their teacher. And the thing is, each time the names would change, but the story would be the same. And so there was also this time in May of 2013 where he reached out to this former student to come to the church that we were just starting in Atlanta. And so I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah, I would love to have him. Like, that'd be great. And so when I came home, he was crying on the steps, and I'm like, what's wrong? He began to tell me that this person said if he didn't pay for his therapy, that he would call the cops. And so I'm like, wait, what do you mean therapy, cops? It wasn't clicking to me. And so he then took a deep breath and he said, well, he is trying to say that I did something to him, but really it wasn't me. It was the other teacher. Like, I really didn't do anything. Like, it was not me, and this is just the devil. And he began to call, like, all the preachers that we knew, saying, like, the enemy is attacking me. He didn't say what it was, but he was just telling them to pray. And I mean, he was praying, he was fasting. And he was really just saying, like, no, like, I really did nothing to him. Then he told me, Well, what really happened, I'm going to tell you what really happened. It was a few days later. He said, I'm going to tell you what really happened. And he told me that this person came to his mom's house to spend the night when he was in high school. Again, my husband at the time wasn't in high school, but the student was. And he said that he woke up to him performing oral sex on him. And I told him that a judge, like no judge would believe that, because he had also said this other student did it, and he had also said this other student did it. And so at this point, I questioned him like, hey, so now we're up to 3 students that you gave me first and last names that they did this to you. Like, why would you keep letting students come to the house if this is what's happening? He began to explain to me that I didn't understand molestation. I've never been molested, and how the enemy always had this target on his back, and how, you know, I just didn't understand even boys who didn't have fathers in their lives, and all he wanted to do was be a father, and they really just misplaced that. And so like he would forgive them and just move on, and I just need to understand. And so fast forward to years later, I'm hearing other new names, first and last names. Then he did describe some things that happened between him and gentlemen while he was in high school, again, while he's on the phone with this person. And the things that happened with him and gentlemen while he was in high school, like, that's very different than being a pedophile, right? Because they were the same age. However, I still would have liked to know, because again, I thought I was marrying a virgin. I was told I was marrying a virgin. And so when I left, there was a lot of triangulation, a lot of rumors that he was spreading, down to I was mentally ill. He spreaded that I was stealing, or I stole money from the church. And I understand why he had to make up those lies. He had to say that I stole money because he needed to explain to the people who remained with him why he had nothing, and it seemed as though I was still living and still doing it well. And it was because he painted this picture as though I was this damsel in distress. He painted this picture as though he was just this wonderful husband, but really behind the scenes, I was, by the help and through the grace of God, like everything that was good that was happening, by the grace of God, it was me and a team of honest people working on it. And so he needed a way out, a way to still get their money and to not look like the fraud that he really was. So October of 2020, a former member puts up a post expressing how she was disappointed to find out, because things did get out about him being with other people while he was married, and especially the whole pedophilia thing, like being with underage people, being with somebody who was your godson, you know. And so when that got out, she was disappointed. So she did put up something on Facebook stating that she was disappointed by this former pastor, and you know, she's just thankful nothing happened to her son. And so from what I'm told, people began to just comment on there, and unfortunately people who are with him, his right-hand man, along with 2 others, they got on there just saying very condescending things, lying. One of the things, and they were silly things, but things that I know were coming from him. For instance, the one female that got on there just expressed that, hey, I'm still going around with the title that only came from married. I'm still using Lady Renee. And so for somebody else, that would mean nothing. For me, I sat down with him 2014 when he first was unfaithful with his godson, and I told him, so at that time I was just about to release a single, and I told him, I said, hey, so when I release this and everything from now on, my stage name now is Lady Renee. And I said, you know, this works for me for so many reasons. The first reason, I was honest with him. I said, when I'm no longer married to you, I don't want to still be using your last name. Like, I want people to get used to me not being associated with your last name in case we are no longer married. And I also told him that I wanted to do things as an artist, and I wanted to be in more than just a church, and I wanted people to be comfortable with me. I felt like prior to that, I always went by Pastor Renee or Lady Francis, Pastor Renee or Lady Francis. And I felt like when people said pastor, no matter how kind of like cool I looked, most people froze up. And because I'm young, I wanted to be able to go in and out of all different genres, all different rooms, and people be comfortable. And so we had Lady Gaga, and I'm like, oh, I love the sound of Lady Renee. And so that was my honest conversation with him. And I remember him years later saying, like, you won't be anything without me, and you can't use that name without me. And I'm like, yeah, so it's not First Lady for church. It's literally my stage name now. It's a brand name now. Like, I have it on stuff. I'm keeping it. And so as silly as it sounds, it was something that he had somebody say, basically to just say like, oh, she can't use that name anymore. And to show even how much more kind of twisted that is, he's still going by doctor, and he purchased his doctorate online from the Universal Life Church in 2008. And so that isn't something that I'm saying, hey, don't go by doctor because you're not technically a doctor. And so just things like that were so petty. Also, the two men on there, they became very aggressive. And one of the things they said was, oh, so now she's gonna say she was beat too? And the thing is, as close as they think they were never in our marriage, right? Whatever they had going on, it was still not in our marriage. And that's why things are typically called extramarital, because it's not in our marriage. And so the same person that was saying, oh, so is he gonna say, oh, so is she gonna say that he was violent too, that he beat her too? Like, he was violent with him. He had, on August 11th of 2017, he had tried to run him over with a vehicle at Main Event because he said that he did not pay for his food and they were supposed to be taking him out for his birthday. That's what Mr. Francis really tried to do. Also, he had pinned this same man that's saying, wait, so is she gonna say that he beat her too? This same man was pinned on the floor by Dr. Francis in his apartment because he asked him to leave and he said no. He said, your mom is gonna have to make me leave because this is her apartment. So like, they literally called his mom while he is on the floor screaming and crying because he can't get up. And so there were violent times in our marriage. There were things that happened in our marriage. In addition to him shooting me out the car, there was this other time where I was sitting holding my baby, it was October of 2017. He was born July of 2017. And he came home from church. And I remember just going through a list because he said, hey, you keep accusing me of stuff, like, tell me when. So I went through the list of what I had documented. And so he sat there and said, you're being so historical and you're just crazy and this is stupid. And he went to swing his hand and my baby was here, but when he swung his hand, I tried to like get him away. My baby flew where I couldn't see the baby, and he had me pinned down on the bed. I heard my baby crying. He would not allow, like he was 280 pounds at the time, and I was a lot smaller. And so he had me pinned, would not let me get up. And I said, I hear the baby crying. Please just let me get up. Please just let me get up. And he said, no, like if you thought about the baby crying, you shouldn't have swung your arm. You shouldn't have swung your arm. And so he had claimed that when I swung, I fractured something in his arm, which when he went to the doctor, that was confirmed. But it was a swing because he was about to attack me. And there were also other times. I never called the police. I didn't call the police because Georgia is a place where if you call the police, they typically will take both of you to jail. Also, because of the way he cries, and even when we would get into these physical altercations, he would always attack first. But when we would get into these altercations, because I would fight back, he would have markings. And so it did sometimes, the end would sometimes look as though I was the aggressor, even though I was just simply fighting back. So there were also times where violence happened at our church and nothing happened. Like this right-hand man fought his girlfriend outside of the church. Nothing happened. This same person jacked another man up out at the church and nothing happened. So there were many times of violence. And I'll say one of the blessings of that post and of them being on there and doing that was it showed people more than it ever could tell people just who the person I was married to was. And I remember a pastor's wife calling me and she's like, my husband really wants to talk to you. And so he said, Lady Renee, I've seen everything that happened on Facebook. And he just said, I just want to make sure you're okay. Like, where are you? So many men were inboxing me, asking me where I was because they were saying, like, we want to come protect you. And the way they're talking about you, like, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? Because they could tell from the post that these men were aggressive and they were going to do whatever they could to make sure that their leader, you know, his name was good. Because when it's all said and done, you know, many people say, oh, it's two sides to every story and it takes two to tango. But this person knows behind closed doors who I was. This person knows that they are not telling the truth. This person knows the mother, the wife, the pastor, everything that I was behind closed doors. I mean, one of the things that even happened, one time I woke up to him crying and he's like, why are you with me? Like, you're just so good. Why are you really with me? And I remember in that moment being like, wait, is he serious? You know, and I'm just like, oh no, like you're good too. We're both good. But in this moment, when this Facebook thing happened, in addition to people realizing that I really needed protection and they wanted to make sure that I was physically okay, also it showed his real character. You know, I had so many men reaching out saying, no man would ever do that, ever, no matter what. No man would ever allow his friends, people from his church, nobody to get on social media and disrespect the mother of their children like that, you know. And this was again all to cover up for the wrong that he had done. One of the things that this post also brought was so many more people saying me too, and not me too by random people, but me too by this exact person. There were people contacting me saying that they were going to do documentaries from the charter school, like just from all these different places, because he had been to several schools in the city of Rochester, New York, and there were so many people coming forward with their stories. And if they weren't sending them to me, they were sending them to people I know, and I was receiving screenshots like, oh, he did this to me too. And so I ended up talking to one individual who told me the different things he was doing to him, and I realized even more that I literally was a cover. He literally pursued me because at the time, that he pursued me, it was literally because he was about to be investigated about allegations concerning young men. And so although it didn't look good to be involved with a younger lady, he would rather it be a younger lady than a younger man. The thing about the different people that have come forward, you know, saying like, he did it to me too, he did it to me too, from him, and I can and will, when the time permits, I will testify in the court of law that he literally, by the time I left him, I had already had 7 first and last names of young men who he said had performed oral sex on him while he was asleep, and he was the teacher at School of the Arts. Learning of all of that was extremely devastating. Learning that this person is a literal predator, that this person is very calculated and hiding behind God and hiding behind the cloth and hiding even behind forgiveness. Because that's one of the things he said in one of his videos. You know, some things that got out about me, yeah, they're true, and some things were not true, but I still should have been covered, right? And so that's one of the major things he said to me, like, how dare you uncover me, even when I told the bishop. And that is not true, unfortunately. That is a doctrine that has gotten into many churches where predators are able to be hidden, and they're hidden in the name of, we're just going to put this under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen. And so I am aware that not many people will be comfortable with me saying all that I said today. There were so many things that I went through in the name of God, in the name of your suffering for righteousness' sake. And it was really gaslighting. It was really manipulation. It was so much spiritual abuse. There was so many times where I should have and could have left with God's permission. But I even came from the place where you pray and you stay. It would be easy for me to go on with the rest of my life and pretend like none of this ever happened. But I can't. I can't for the innocent blood that is crying out. I can't for the young men that were molested and sometimes still have nightmares about what had happened. I can't for the members of our churches who were lied to, who were spiritually abused many times in the name of God, who were taken advantage of many times in the name of God. I can't, like, I cannot be quiet. I cannot be silent. And I often wonder if I was supposed to read somebody's book. I often wonder if I was supposed to see somebody's documentary years ago that would have stopped me or got me to leave my marriage even quicker, stop me from entering the marriage or even leave it quicker, but they didn't write it out of fear. And so for that reason, even with death threats, I have to release this. For that reason, even with knowing that many people won't understand, knowing that many people will think, oh no, she just needs to forgive and forget, I have to speak up, I have to speak out, because people need to know that this is not what God wants for them. And people need to see that this is nothing to hide from. If this is nothing to hide, if you're in it, there is hope. You can get out. I have been healed so much. I am still honestly in the process of healing, but I trust and believe God, and I know that He makes all things beautiful in His time. Even though everything I went through was a nightmare, the thing that I hold on to is what the enemy meant for evil. God has a way of turning it for good. And so even if what I went through was for one person, it was worth it, and I'm thankful that I can now speak out so nobody else has to go through what I went through. I didn't mean to cry.
God, my Savior.